have low vision, or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Kevin Siepel, and for the next hour I'll be reading from current issues of the Niagara Gazette on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Here's an article from the December 18th issue of the Niagara Gazette entitled Massive Data Center Proposed for Stamp. Amount of electricity needed could power 400,000 homes, by J. Dale Shoemaker. A national builder is once again proposing to construct a massive data center at Genesee County's Stamp Industrial Park, one that would use so much electricity that it could drive up costs for residential and commercial consumers. The data center's power demands could also hamstring efforts to recruit other businesses to the industrial park, which has struggled to attract tenants despite a state investment of $100 million. A proposal filed with Genesee County officials on Friday from Stream Data Centers for a 2.2 million square foot facility states it would require some 500 megawatts of electricity, 83% of all power that will be available at Stamp. That amount of electricity could power nearly every home in Erie County, which has 411,500 households, according to the most recent U.S. Census data. It could power nearly every home in Monroe, Genesee, Livingston, Orleans, and Wyoming counties combined. That's Rochester, its suburbs, and 4 surrounding counties, 400,700 households total. Critics and environmental advocates worry a data center drawing so much power could drive up energy costs for New Yorkers by an undetermined amount. Researchers have found that data centers elsewhere in the country are contributing to a rise in electricity costs for consumers. Electricity rates in New York State are already higher than the national average. A November analysis showed power bills in the state ranked 17th highest in the nation. The developer said in its application, the data center would be leased to a Fortune 50 company whose ranks include tech giants like Amazon, Apple, and Microsoft. While Stream Data Centers has not yet requested public subsidies, government assistance could tally hundreds of millions of dollars in the form of discounted hydropower and property and sales tax exemptions. The project is slated to create 120 jobs, 2 fewer than Stream's previous proposal. We shouldn't just take the lowest hanging fruit that comes our way. We can afford to be a little picky in what we're putting our tax dollars towards, said Bridge Rauch, an environmental justice organizer with the Buffalo-based Clean Air Coalition, which has advocated against other data centers in the region. If they want to build them, they should pay the full cost of that project. Meanwhile, members of the Tonawanda-Seneca Nation, whose territory abuts Stamp, fear the data center could harm the old-growth forest they rely on for medicinal plants and hunting, primarily due to 24/7 lights and noise emitted from their facility. The nation also fears that stormwater runoff from Stream's property could harm a creek that runs through its land. The Tonawanda-Senecas earlier this year sued Stream Data Centers and the Genesee County Economic Development Center, the local industrial development agency building Stamp, for failing to conduct a proper environmental review of a past data center proposal. Stream canceled that project, making the lawsuit moot and handing the nation a victory, but vowed to return. Part of my outrage comes from the fact that the presence of a data center at Stamp has been so forcefully rejected by not only the Tonawanda-Seneca Nation, but also by local residents, said Sarah Howard, an organizer with the group Allies of the Tonawanda-Seneca Nation. To come back with this more than twice as large and much more energy-intensive facility is really disrespectful of the local voices. In statements to Investigative Post, Mark Massey, President and CEO of the Genesee County Economic Development Center, said his agency is evaluating the proposal from Stream Data, saying that any land sales or financial incentives will be publicly considered at a later date. A spokesperson for Stream Data did not return a request for comment. Earlier this year, Stream Data proposed a $6.32 billion, 900,000 square foot data center at Stamp that would have used 250 megawatts of power, 10,000 gallons of water per day, and employed 122. In March, the Genesee County Economic Development Center awarded the project a $472 million subsidy package. The newest proposal is nearly 2.5 times larger at 2.2 million square feet, or 38 football fields. The data center would use 500 megawatts of power, 20,000 gallons of water per day, and employ 120. The proposal comes as the IDA has struggled to fill the 1,250-acre industrial park in the town of Alabama, 13 miles northwest of Batavia, despite some 15 years of planning and $100 million in state grants. Only two companies, Plug Power and Edwards Vacuum, have committed to the megasite, though Plug Power, struggling financially, recently canceled its plans. A portion of the data center campus will be built on land previously committed to Plug Power. The IDA could earn more than $100 million in fees from the proposed data center. The IDA is constructing a 600 megawatt substation to provide electricity to Stamp tenants. Initially, Plug Power was going to cover the cost, but with that company's plans scuttled, the IDA was given permission by the state to redirect a $56 million grant to pay for the work. The IDA began entertaining data center firms last year in a bid to finish the substation and recoup the state grant money. Should the 500 megawatt data center come to life, Stamp will be left with about 93 megawatts of power to offer to future tenants. The availability of hundreds of megawatts of power was a gold mine for the industrial park. Despite its remote location, site selectors previously told Investigative Post. Massey of the IDA said in a statement that 93 megawatts was plenty to market to other firms. The agency, he said, will be able to continue to market low-cost power in our ongoing efforts to bring more companies to Stamp, he said. For more on this story, visit investigativepost.org. End of article. Here's an article from the same issue of the Niagara Gazette entitled Teen Drug Use Low, but Survey Finds Small Rise in Heroin Cocaine Use by Mike Stauby of the Associated Press. Teen use of alcohol, nicotine, and marijuana remains at record lows, according to national survey results released Wednesday. They consume a lot of energy drinks, though, and there are slight but concerning increases in heroin and cocaine use. But overall, the findings indicate teens are drinking, smoking, and using substances at much lower rates than in the past. 2/3 of 12th graders this year said they hadn't used alcohol, marijuana, cigarettes, or electronic cigarettes in the previous 30 days. 30 years ago, before the advent of e-cigarettes, the figure was closer to about 1/3. Among 10th graders, 82% said they hadn't used any of those substances recently. Among 8th graders, 91% didn't use any of them. Both are records for those ages in the annual survey. The findings also seem to echo other surveys that show continued declines in teen sexual activity, which experts say is at least partly due to teens connecting through smartphones and social media instead of in person. Online connections don't create the same opportunities for experimenting with sex, alcohol, or marijuana as unsupervised time face-to-face, said Laura Lindberg, a Rutgers University professor who researches adolescent sexual behavior. Douglas Smith, a University of Illinois researcher, noted earlier generations seemed more likely to, quote, go to the woods and drink or go to a party where there were no parents to socialize with. Now teenagers can be in constant communication with their friends and can live a life with their friends in virtual space without using substances, Smith added. The new results come from the federally funded Monitoring the Future survey run by the University of Michigan. The annual survey has been operating since 1975 and has long been considered a top source of national data on teen substance abuse. This year's findings are based on responses from about 24,000 students in grades 8, 10, and 12 in schools across the country. It was conducted from February to June this year. Teen drug use has been gradually declining for decades and fell dramatically at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic when students across the country were told not to go to schools and to avoid parties or other gatherings. Experts expected at least a bit of a rebound as pandemic restrictions eased, but that hasn't happened. The 2025 results show no increases in teens' use of alcohol, marijuana, cigarettes, or nicotine vapes in any of the 3 grade levels. In 2024, researchers had noted an uptick in the use of nicotine pouches, but that too held steady this year, the survey found. Energy drinks are as popular as ever, with daily consumption reported by 23% of 12th graders, 20% of 10th graders, and 18% of 8th graders. The survey also found a striking increase in heroin use. Use by 12th graders in the previous 12 months rose to 0.9% in 2025 from 0.2% the year before. Use by 10th graders hit 0.5%, up from 0.1%, and use by 8th graders also rose to 0.5%, up from 0.2%. Cocaine use held steady for 10th graders but rose for 8th graders to 0.6% and 12th graders to 1.4%. Teen heroin and cocaine use are, quote, leagues below what they were decades ago, but the increases warrant close monitoring, said Richard Meach, survey team lead at the University of Michigan. There are other possible factors for this overall decline in teen substance use: efforts to curb youth vaping, taxes on some substances, and the fact that teenagers are less likely to drive than in the past. Adolescents' lives are complicated, and these changes don't have a single explanation, Lindberg said in an email. End of article. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Niagara Gazette on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Here is another article from the December 18th issue of the Niagara Gazette entitled "Saturn's Moon Titan may not have a buried ocean as long suspected," by Marcia Dunn of the Associated Press. Saturn's giant moon Titan may not have a vast underground ocean after all. Titan instead may hold deep layers of ice and slush more akin to Earth's polar seas, with pockets of melted water where life could possibly survive and even thrive, scientists reported Wednesday. The team, led by researchers at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, challenged the decade-long assumption of a buried global ocean at Titan after taking a fresh look at observations made years ago by NASA's Cassini spacecraft around Saturn. They stressed that no one has found any signs of life at Titan, the solar system's second-largest moon, spanning 3,200 miles, and brimming with lakes of liquid methane on its frosty surface. But with the latest findings suggesting a slushy, near-melting environment, there is strong justification for continued optimism regarding the potential for extraterrestrial life, said the University of Washington's Baptiste Journeau, who took part in the study published in the journal Nature. As to what form of life that might be, possibly strictly microscopic, Nature has repeatedly demonstrated far greater creativity than the most imaginative scientists, he said in an email. JPL's Flavio Petrica, the lead author, said Titan's ocean may have frozen in the past and is currently melting, or its hydrosphere might be evolving toward complete freezing. Computer models suggest these layers of ice, slush, and water extend to a depth of more than 340 miles. The outer ice shell is thought to be about 100 miles deep, covering layers of slush and pools of water that could go down another 250 miles. This water could be as warm as 68 degrees Fahrenheit. Because Titan is tidally locked, the same side of the moon faces Saturn all the time, just like our own moon and Earth. Saturn's gravitational pull is so intense that it deforms the moon's surface, creating bulges as high as 30 feet when the two bodies are closest. Through improved data processing, Petrica and his team managed to measure the timing between the peak gravitational tug and the rising of Titan's surface. If the moon held a wet ocean, the effect would be immediate, Petrica said, but a 15-hour gap was detected, indicating an interior of slushy ice with pockets of liquid water. Computer modeling of Titan's orientation in space supported this theory. Sapienza University of Rome's Luciano Yes, whose previous studies using Cassini data indicated a hidden ocean at Titan, is not convinced by the latest findings. While certainly intriguing and will stimulate renewed discussion, at present, the available evidence looks certainly not sufficient to exclude Titan from the family of ocean worlds, Yes said in an email. NASA's planned Dragonfly mission, featuring a helicopter-type craft due to launch to Titan later this decade, is expected to provide more clarity on the moon's innards. Journeau is part of that team. Saturn leads the solar system's moon inventory with 274 moons. Jupiter's moon Ganymede is just a little larger than Titan, with a possible underground ocean. Other suspected water worlds include Saturn's Enceladus and Jupiter's Europa, both of which are believed to have geysers of water erupting from their frozen crusts. Launched in 1997, Cassini reached Saturn in 2004, orbiting the ringed planet and flying past its moons until deliberately plunging through Saturn's atmosphere in 2017. End of article. Here's an article from the December 19th issue of the Niagara Gazette entitled If a Tree Falls in the Woods by Douglas J. Usiak. 'Tis the time of year when many of us who are a little older do a lot of reflecting, taking stock of the blessings we have and sometimes the ones we don't. When I look back on my life, I am deeply grateful for what the American people put in place after my accident in the Army more than 50 years ago. If not for their work, I would not be here writing this today or sharing the fulfilling life I've been able to live with family, friends, a long career, and now grandchildren. The American people saw fit to ensure that after I became totally blind, everything possible was done to give me the same opportunities and choices we all expect in this country, the freedom to pursue our dreams and desires. And when those opportunities were blocked by barriers, Americans also made sure I had a way to raise concerns and work toward change, not just for myself, but for others pursuing life, liberty, and happiness. In the 1970s, people with disabilities fought for and won the passage of Public Law 93-112, which established baseline rehabilitation services nationwide, created essential national programs, and included Section 504, the first federal civil rights protection prohibiting disability discrimination in federally funded programs. Shortly after Public Law 94-142 and shortly after Public Law 94-142 ensured equal educational opportunity and appropriate supports for children with disabilities in public schools. Together, these laws helped people with disabilities shed shame and step into a cloak of opportunity and growth. Then came the Reagan-Bush era, when efforts were made to strip away these so-called unnecessary regulations. Hundreds of thousands of Americans with and without disabilities said no. Those laws not only survived, but their protections were strengthened. The 1980s became a watershed decade, bringing a greater inclusion and acceptance through laws like the Air Carrier Access Act, the Fair Housing Act, and most significantly, the Americans with Disabilities Act. These laws made it possible for people with disabilities to live, work, and participate fully in their communities. Because of them, many of us built careers, raised families, contributed to our communities, and lived full lives. But today I look around and I wonder what's happening. The very laws Americans put in place to ensure equal opportunity for millions of families are under attack almost daily. Worse still, the public is being outmuscled with fewer chances to say no. The Office of Civil Rights within the Department of Education is drastically scaling back its ability to address disability discrimination. It will no longer be able to identify patterns of discrimination, instead responding only to individual complaints while limiting communication with its central office in Washington, D.C. This weakens enforcement and leaves systemic discrimination unchecked. More recently, the administration fired more than 100 employees from the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services. These positions were later reinstated after a government shutdown, but with renewed threats of termination looming. The loss of these services would directly harm tens of thousands of children who depend on educational supports, and millions of adults who acquire disabilities and rely on rehabilitation services to return to work and community life. We are already seeing the real-world consequences of undermining public health protections. This year alone, the United States has experienced its worst measles outbreak since the disease was declared eliminated in 2000, with more than 1,800 reported cases, alongside roughly 25,000 cases of whooping cough nationwide. At least 13 people, most of them infants too young to be fully vaccinated, have died. These are not mysterious illnesses or unavoidable tragedies. They are the predictable result of declining vaccination rates. Measles and pertussis vaccines are highly effective, and when community coverage remains above the herd immunity threshold, outbreaks burn out quickly. When it doesn't, the most vulnerable pay the price. Public health, like civil rights, only works when it works for everyone. Then there is the most recent effort to avoid providing American Sign Language interpreters during presidential press conferences and national addresses, despite the clear requirements of the Americans with Disabilities Act. The justification offered? That interpreters would intrude on the president's control over his public image. That explanation leaves me shaking my head. What kind of image is projected when a president's mouth moves, but a significant portion of the public is excluded from understanding what is being said? It gives new meaning to an old adage: if a tree falls in the woods and only some are allowed access to its fall, what's really being communicated? From this proud American, the answer is nothing good. End of article. Here's an article also from the December 19th issue of the Niagara Gazette entitled, COVID isn't comparable to the common cold, by Richard Feldman. Unfortunately, most Americans have COVID-19 in their rearview mirror. Only 23% of adults received last year's updated COVID booster. COVID fatigue, disinformation leading to vaccine distrust, uncertainty, political agendas, and plain old complacency are responsible. Many believe that COVID is now not much different from a common cold. True, it's less virulent due to progressive, favorable mutations and the collective immunity that has developed from millions having become infected and or receiving COVID vaccines. But to think that COVID is merely like a cold is a big mistake. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, 50,000 people died last year from COVID, and there are potential long-term, life-changing consequences from COVID. Let's take a look. Long COVID is a condition of symptoms continuing for at least 3 months after the infection. An article in the Journal of Medical Virology found that 20% of long COVID patients were still symptomatic at 3 years. Other studies have also found that symptoms can persist for months and years. Symptoms include extreme fatigue, poor concentration, brain fog, cardiac arrhythmias, shortness of breath, persistent cough, chest pain, joint and muscle pain, headaches, reductions in the sense of smell, sleep and mood disturbances, and visual changes. According to a 2025 Lancet study, 85% of people with long COVID had multiple SARS-CoV-2 infections over the 4-year study. The study also demonstrated, consistent with other research, that prior vaccination reduces the risk of developing this condition. Long COVID isn't rare. 2 surveys conducted by the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality and reported in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 2024 established that 6.9% to 8.4% of the U.S. population has had long COVID. Midlife individuals, people with chronic conditions, and women had the highest rates. The study also found decreased rates in vaccinated people, especially in those receiving an updated booster. Another 2024 Journal of the American Medical Association study demonstrated a 31% higher risk among females. COVID can still, albeit uncommonly, cause serious complications. These include acute respiratory failure, acute liver and kidney injury, blood clots, and thromboembolism, multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children, stroke, encephalopathy, myocarditis, heart failure, and various other cardiac conditions. A year-long study in the European Heart Journal revealed accelerated vascular aging, especially in women, after a COVID infection. This vascular injury was measured by increased vessel stiffness. A mild COVID infection resulted in about 5 additional years of vessel aging and up to 10 years if the woman was in the ICU. The aging was most marked among those with long COVID and less pronounced in the vaccinated. Recent research published in Nature Communications identified accelerated structural brain aging on MRI imaging among those living through the COVID pandemic. Remarkably, this included even those who were not infected, possibly due to social isolation and other pandemic-created situational factors. The greatest effect was among those infected during the 2-year study, especially among older individuals and men. Importantly, a decrease in cognitive function was only observed in those with a history of COVID infection. Notwithstanding disinformation, the COVID vaccine is safe and effective in reducing severe infection and long-term ill effects. Despite the CDC issuing contradictory and confusing recommendations with certain eligibility restrictions, COVID vaccination should now be generally available to anyone who desires one. Everyone should consider receiving an updated booster. End of article. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Niagara Gazette on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Here's an article from the December 20th to 21st edition of the Niagara Gazette entitled How Local Wildlife Copes with Harsh Winter Weather by Douglas Domedian. We had some nice weather this fall, but winter, which doesn't arrive officially until Sunday, has brought us some really cold temperatures and wind. Cold never bothered me much when I was younger, but now that I'm all grown up, it does. Snow hasn't been a real problem so far, and I'm hoping that it doesn't get to be, as I no longer enjoy sitting on my ATV and plowing the driveway. There's plenty of firewood stacked under cover for me to use in the wood stove in my living room. I use electric heat most of the time and keep it set around 64 degrees, but I like to fire up the old wood-burning soapstone stove in the evening. The visual effect and warmth that it gives off make for a relaxing and comfortable evening. What does wildlife do when the temperature drops and the wind kicks up? Many birds just get out of town, heading south to a warmer climate. The great egrets, great blue herons, hummingbirds, shorebirds, little herons, vultures, and terns are all gone now. The birds that remain depend on open water, so they also leave, but generally go only as far south as necessary to find it and food. Diving ducks such as bluebills, goldeneyes, scooters, redheads, buffaloheads, old squaws, and canvasbacks move to the open water areas like Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, the Niagara River, and some of the Finger Lakes that remain open. Our local resident geese usually stick around as they have learned to make a living here in the winter, but the regular migrating goose population heads further south. Sometimes a milder winter allows some birds to move into our area from further north and enables them to survive in local marshes. Last year was such a time, and I had a ball photographing tundra and trumpeter swans that took up residence in a few marshes. When harsh winter conditions hit, I believe they just headed up to the Niagara River because as soon as those hard periods disappeared, they were back to a couple of open marshes. There were even about 50 sandhill cranes spending a bit of time here during that winter weather break. Snow geese, which aren't often seen around here, made a pretty good showing a few years ago too. And occasionally the snow owl moves down from northern tundra country to give us a treat. Smaller birds, orioles, warblers, martins, flycatchers, catbirds, kinglets, tree swallows, and wrens count on insects for a living and therefore are forced to move south too. But others, including blue jays, cardinals, titmouses, woodpeckers, nuthatches, goldfinches, mourning doves, house and purple finches, chickadees, white-throated and house sparrows, and starlings, have learned to deal with our winters. Most of them survive on seeds of some sort, and some, like the woodpeckers, are able to find dormant insects with their special beak adaptations. Many also take advantage of the bird feeders around homes where humans offer them various seeds. Owls stick out our winters and are able to survive on small animals, mice, voles, even small game such as rabbits, grouse, and songbirds. Some hawks remain to live on the same things, but they, quote-unquote, work during the day. Eagles also remain unless severe conditions drive them to open water areas for brief periods. They, of course, start their nesting season in January with nest building and egg laying in March. Some animals, like woodchucks, bears, chipmunks, skunks, some insects, reptiles, and amphibians, use some form of hibernation underground to avoid winter. Their metabolism and heartbeat are slowed way down. Some, including bears and chipmunks, enter a lighter type of torpor and are easily aroused. Reptiles and amphibians use a system called brumation, which is slightly different from true hibernation. Foxes, coyotes, otters, beavers, squirrels, and muskrats remain active during winter, as do larger animals such as deer. Raccoons will den up during really harsh conditions. All of these creatures have to endure the cold, windy conditions that we hate. They have great insulating furs, but they don't have the conveniences of protection that we do, and they must work hard to find food. Oh, now the wood stove is calling for more wood. I think I will heat up some old pizza for supper and watch the birds around my bird feeder. End of article. Here's an article also from the December 20th to 21st edition of the Niagara Gazette entitled Spurning Adulthood in America by B.B. Singer. The warning signs have been around a long time, at least since the hang-loose, drug-savoring, dressed-down, late 60s revolt of that era's young against this, that, and the other. With rejection of once solid values increasingly devolving through succeeding decades into rejection of adulthood itself, so it sometimes feels. Think of the contrast between Hugh Beaumont Barr Billingsley, so believable and authentic as Beeve's parents, versus the lead characters in Seinfeld or Friends, still grappling quite late in life to become settled. Or of bands like the Count Basie Orchestra giving way to the Electric Prunes or Canned Heat. Not to mention punk rock groups like the Adolescents and others treated in Pat Blasill's egregiously titled Someday All the Adults Will Die. But even in society well beyond the world of pop music or Tinseltown, this trend seems to be widening. With the result that the current atmosphere seems ever more puerile, stemming from the Latin word puer for boy. Too many under 30, even 40, don't apparently want to embrace this thing called adulthood, or let's say fully responsible adulthood. Instead, they prefer playing when possible, including at protests of different sorts, some nonsensical and potentially violent. Parents? Yes, there are indeed young parents, thankfully so, but too frequently at that crucial enterprise, too, one observes, in the shibboleth, comparative babies raising babies. So it sometimes seems. We've all witnessed poor kids acting out via screams, twisting, face-making, just to get some positive attention from cell phone-distracted elders. Giving such attention should be easy, but not invariably for the puerile. Regarding our theme of this trend growing in the general culture, one strand among many. There used to be an American elite to aim for, model on, and try and inhabit. Yes, a mainstream worth embracing. Instead, large amounts of today's not-so-young get off on their own narrow-gauged, self-centered amusement realms, within which there's a slew of possibilities. Think sports betting, Instagram, video games, and so forth. Ah me, when life starts legitimately as a game, patty cakes, but remains one as adulthood should take over, ain't such a deployment worth noticing? While by contrast, grimly adult Chinese communists make inroads everywhere, and even within the U.S. itself. Or brutally adult Putin sees East European conquest as just fine. Not to mention Iran's soberly clad, terror-backing, nuke-hungry leaders. Do our many apparently callow care enough about all that? Realizing that this comfy world they currently enjoy could be quickly canceled? Not enough, it seems. Better to immerse oneself in fantasy flicks, or even beer-guzzling extravaganzas. That's what happens, I guess, when one is spoiled, though many older types, me included, aren't immune either. The latter, too, bicycle like kids around senior-centered developments and growingly in easy living states like Florida or Arizona. When you're part of an inheritor class, me again included, such puerility, I suppose, becomes a handy lure. When you owe big time to Edison and Ford, Salk and Sabin, Gates and Jobs, and don't acknowledge that, it's easy to stay, well, Peter Pan-like. Therein lies the problem, not even realizing how much one takes for granted, feeling via magical thinking that all these toys of sorts, these lulling tech aids just plopped down from the sky, leaving one free to be a pleasure-savoring puer ludens, Latin for playing boy. Yes, it's now partly due to the nature of these boys themselves, especially electronic ones, puer ludens, riffing off the original adult-oriented Latin phrase. And even as middle age approaches, all too as those barbaric waters keep rising everywhere, including in our own downtowns, period. Barbaric talk, barbaric thuggery, barbaric drug peddling, easy to know about and see. So let's just play and forget it all, staying in the figurative sandbox, simply indulging whenever possible. Ah, me, I can certainly hear your quibbles, one being, who in whatever generation doesn't indulge at times? Round-the-clock gravitas would be a drag, right? You mean you, O sage one, don't sometimes flip aimlessly at channels or pig out on chocolate? Point well taken, but I still think puerility and the consequent rejection of adulthood have been increasing here, versus myriad adults in tougher environments abroad, those who simply can't emulate such trends, and who may not put up with our infantile hijinks much longer either. End of article. Here's an article from the December 23rd issue of the Niagara Gazette entitled GI Land Given to Seneca Nation, GI standing for Grand Island. Site bordering Long Road and I-190 presents economic development opportunities. By staff reports. The Seneca Nation is returning more than 200 acres of its ancestral homelands to nation ownership, thanks to a donation agreement with a local developer. William and Michael Huntress, owners of Equest Development, are transferring title to 207 acres of land in the town of Grand Island to the nation for $1. The transaction was recently approved by the Seneca Nation Council. We have lost tens of thousands of acres of our homeland throughout history, so anytime we are able to return any portion of our homelands to Seneca Nation ownership for the ultimate benefit of our people, it is an important step forward, Seneca Nation President J. Conrad Seneca said. On behalf of the Seneca Nation and all Seneca people, I want to thank Bill and Michael Huntress for generously helping us create a path for new growth for our nation. The 207-acre site is located west of I-190 between Long Road and Bedell Road. The land currently has multiple zoning designations, with the eastern 141 acres closest to I-190 currently zoned for industrial use, and the western 66 acres currently zoned for residential use. We're happy to have donated this land to the Seneca Nation, the rightful owners of Grand Island, said Michael Huntress. We believe it's the right thing to do. There are no immediate plans for the land. A site of this size and in this location creates a number of potential economic development opportunities, President Seneca said, as we continue to try to grow and strengthen our economy and provide for the quality of life needs for our people. Land is a vital asset. We'll take a strategic look at how we can put this newly reclaimed site to the best use in meeting the long-term needs of our nation. End of article. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Niagara Gazette on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Here is an article also from the December 23rd edition of the Niagara Gazette entitled New York, Ontario Sign Nuclear Energy Agreement. Canadians will share nuclear expertise with NIPA as it develops new facility. By Robert Creenan. As New York State looks to add more nuclear power sources, it has formed a partnership with Ontario to bring in its expertise in the field. Governor Kathy Hochul and Ontario Premier Doug Ford signed an agreement Friday establishing a framework for collaboration for developing advanced nuclear technologies between the state and province, including large-scale reactors and small modular reactors. We as leaders have to focus on reliability, sustainability, and affordability all at the same time, said Hochul during the announcements at the Albright Knox Art Gallery. We found a way, and that is through nuclear energy. The New York Power Authority and the Ontario Power Generation will share information and leverage their expertise and resources to advance technology and expertise sharing, cross-border ventures, understanding the finances and economics behind nuclear power, and developing the nuclear workforce. This comes after Hochul visited the Robert Moses power plant this past July, announcing the state's intent to build a new nuclear power plant in upstate New York, with 1 gigawatt of capacity. The state's 3 current plants, the James A. Fitzpatrick plant and 9 Mile Point in Oswego County, and the R.E. Ginna plant in Wayne County, account for 3.4 gigawatts of power capacity and 20% of the state's electricity. Since the deadline for requests for information passed earlier this month, 23 developers have expressed interest in building the facility, with 8 communities volunteering to host it. NIPA, that is the New York Power Authority, is looking to start construction by 2033. Hochul noted in her speech that the University at Buffalo is part of the $400 million Empire AI Consortium, and that semiconductor company Micron is building a $100 billion facility near Syracuse. The state's electricity grid is also seeing increased demand from new industrial site builds and data centers, while the current electric infrastructure is getting older. Our ambitions are broad. They're exciting, but if we don't power it, it doesn't work, Hochul said. She also announced $40 million toward a new nuclear workforce training program for NIPA in partnership with universities and unions. Ontario has 3 nuclear power stations, with their 16 reactors having 11.813 gigawatts of combined capacity, according to the World Nuclear Association, with a potential new facility in development in Wesleyville, Ontario, Canada. Canada is also developing the first grid-scale SMRs of any G7 country at the Darlington Nuclear Generating Station located on Lake Ontario, about 20 minutes from downtown Oshawa. OPG has also collaborated with the Tennessee Valley Authority on the further development of SMRs, with Ford offering to collaborate on that technology with New York State. Ford said planned additions to Ontario's facilities would eventually lead to a combined 40 gigawatts of nuclear capacity, enough to power 40 million homes. Who do we want to give our energy to? Our closest friends and allies, said Ford, no matter if that goes to neighboring states, New York, Michigan, or Minnesota. The future is having the energy to power the companies, power the homes, power massive data centers that take a tremendous amount of energy. We are there for you. The state's Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, passed in 2019, requires the state to reduce carbon emissions to 40% below 1990 levels by 2030, aiming to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, along with generating 100% carbon-free electricity by 2040. However, the state's recently approved energy plan for the next 15 years still has fossil fuels in the energy generating mix. NYPA's Renewable Strategic Plan, adopted earlier this month, calls for 5.5 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity among 45 generation projects and 146 distributed storage projects. End of article. Here's an article from the December 24th issue of the Niagara Gazette entitled Thunder of Niagara Air Show Returning This Summer. Popular event will return to airbase grounds on June 20th and 21st by Robert Creenan. After 8 years away, the Thunder of Niagara Air Show will return to Niagara County skies this summer. The show will take place Father's Day weekend, June 20th to 21st, on the Niagara Falls Air Reserve Station grounds, with the 914th Air Refueling Wing running the show and the Niagara Military Affairs Council supporting it. The free event has drawn in around 100,000 spectators in years past. The theme of this air show is Welcome Back, said NIMAC Chairman Mike Zimmerman. It's so exciting to have everyone back on the base. The last time the air show took place in Niagara County was in June 2018. Other attempts to stage the show since have been canceled, either due to COVID or to COVID-19 in 2020, or by Air Force leadership not approving it for 2021, which sent it to the Buffalo waterfront that year. So far, the U.S. Air Force Thunderbirds, the Snowbirds of the Royal Canadian Air Force, the Wings of Blue parachute team, and Rick Volker have been confirmed to appear and fly at the show. There will also be displays and spaces for attendees to get up close and walk into planes. As this year's show takes place the same summer as the United States' 250th anniversary, Zimmerman said they are sure to be some aspects that will be incorporated into the show. There will be more announcements about the show in the months to come. Those interested can sign up for updates through the Thunder of Niagara website. End of article. Here's an article from the December 14th issue of the Niagara Gazette entitled Convenience with a Cost. Fast Shipping is Increasing Emissions by Aya Diab, Associated Press. It feels simple. You shop, find something you want, and you click to buy. It shows up today, overnight, or tomorrow. We've gotten used to that speed, but that convenience comes with a climate cost. Multiple factors shape the environmental toll of a delivery. These include the distance from a fulfillment center, whether the shipment rides in a half-empty truck, how many trips a driver makes in the same area, and the type of transportation used to move the package. When customers choose faster shipping and earlier delivery dates, the system shifts from optimized routing to whatever gets the package out fastest. And that means higher emissions, said Sridevi Rajagopalan, a research scientist at MIT's Center for Transportation and Logistics. For example, trucks may leave warehouses before they're full, and drivers might loop the same neighborhood multiple times a day, she said. For the same demand, fast shipping definitely increases emissions 10 to 12%, she said. To meet tight delivery windows, retailers may rely on air freight, which produces far more emissions than other options, such as trains, making it the most carbon intensive. Given that companies want to be competitive in terms of speed, it comes at the cost of your efficiency, Sridevi said. End of article. Here's an article also from the December 24th issue of the Niagara Gazette entitled, Yes, Virginia, There is a Santa Claus. Editor's note, every Christmas season the Niagara Gazette reprints the letter written by 8-year-old Virginia O'Hanlon to the New York Sun and that newspaper's editorial response, which appeared on September 21st, 1897. Written by Francis Pharcellus Church, it has since become history's most reprinted newspaper editorial. Enjoy it, and have a Merry Christmas. Dear Editor, I am 8 years old. Some of my little friends say there is no Santa Claus. Papa says if you see it in the sun, it's so. Please tell me the truth. Is there a Santa Claus? Virginia O'Hanlon, 115 West 95th Street. Virginia, your little friends are wrong. They have been affected by the skepticism of a skeptical age. They do not believe except they see. They think that nothing can be which is not comprehensible by their little minds. All minds, Virginia, whether they be men's or children's, are little. In this great universe of ours, man is a mere insect, an ant, in his intellect, as compared with the boundless world about him, as measured by the intelligence capable of grasping the whole truth and knowledge. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. He exists as certainly as love and generosity and devotion exist, and you know that they abound and give to your life its highest beauty and joy. Alas, how dreary would be the world if there were no Santa Claus. It would be as dreary as if there were no Virginias. There would be no childlike faith then, no poetry, no romance to make tolerable this existence. We should have no enjoyment except in sense and sight. The eternal light with which childhood fills the world would be extinguished. Not believe in Santa Claus? You might as well not believe in fairies. You might get your papa to hire men to watch in all the chimneys on Christmas Eve to catch Santa Claus. But even if they did not see Santa Claus coming down, what would that prove? Nobody sees Santa Claus, but that is no sign that there is no Santa Claus. The most real things in the world are those that neither children nor men can see. Did you ever see fairies dancing on the lawn? Of course not, but that's no proof that they're not there. Nobody can conceive or imagine all the wonders there are unseen and unseeable in the world. You may tear apart the baby's rattle and see what makes the noise inside, but there is a veil covering the unseen world which not the strongest man, nor even the united strength of all the strongest men that ever lived, could tear apart. Only faith, fancy, poetry, love, romance can push aside that curtain and view and picture the supernatural beauty and glory beyond. Is it all real? Ah, Virginia, in all this world there is nothing else real and abiding. No Santa Claus? Thank God he lives, and he lives forever. 1,000 years from now, Virginia, nay, 10 times 10,000 years from now, he will continue to make glad the heart of childhood. End of article. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from current issues of the Niagara Gazette. We read from the Niagara Gazette every Saturday at 11 a.m. Your reader has been Kevin Siepel. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have a reading of the Dunkirk Observer. Following that at 1 o'clock, we have a reading of some of our Northtown Bee papers, including Amherst, Clarence, Cheektowaga, Lancaster, and Depew. And then at 2 o'clock, we have the Southtown Bees, which includes Orchard Park, the Hamburg Sun, the East Aurora, and West Seneca papers. Stay with us for these readings and more. You're listening to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Radio Reading broadcasts daily readings 24 hours a day of newspapers, magazines, and books to people who are blind or have a print disability and are provided reading radios. Radio Reading's broadcast signal is provided at no charge by WNED. From broadcast studios at 1199 Harlem Road, Radio Reading continues our almost 40-year tradition of award-winning service. For more information on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, call 716-821-5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555. 5555 The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision,